Okay, last week we discussed graphs, equations. We talked about the slope of a line and how to plot points. Any questions about those questions? What's the formula for a slope? Nope. Very good. The slope, M, is y2 minus y1, x2 minus x1. Where point 1 is denoted P1. It's made up of x1, y1. The second point is denoted P2. It's made up of x2, y2. So our steps of finding all these equations: label x1, x2, y1, y2. And plug them into the equation and then solve. When I say solve, at what point do you stop processing? When do you stop working on the equation? What's that? What do you mean simplified? You're right, it is, but what do you mean by simplified? Simplified into what sense? In other words, if I had 1/4, simplified could mean make it 0.25. Is that what you mean? Because 1/4 is not a whole number, 0.25 is not a whole number. So we can't have either of those. So which one do you want to leave it in? When is your final fraction? Yes. When you're dealing with slopes, always leave your answers as fractions. And remember, integers are fractions. The number 8 is a fraction. 8 is made up of 8/1. So every number is a fraction. So what does this mean as a slope? If I said the slope was 8, what am I talking about? What am I saying? What does that mean? Lucky I didn't have a quiz this morning, huh? But what does that mean? That you just defined what it is, but what does it mean? From where? Right. The slope tells us from every point on the graph to its next point, you follow the slope. Go up if positive, down if it's negative, and always to the right on the bottom. But you're right. It's exactly right. It is up 8/1, but you have to start off from the point you begin with. But yeah, you're right. You're absolutely correct. That's exactly what a slope means. So this slope means go up 8 points and over 1. The bottom number is always to the right. Note. The bottom number is always to the right. The top number is the only thing that changes up or down. Okay, based now. Why is that? Because in fractions, the negative can only be either in the top number or in front of the whole thing. The bottom number, the convention for mathematics is you never want the negative number to be on the bottom. Why is that? Because even if you had an answer like this, you're not done because that's a wrong format. Either move the negative on top or move it in front of the whole thing. Which doesn't matter because when you graph it, the negative still affects the top number. Anybody guess why that is? Why is the bottom number never negative? Remember the rules of adding and subtracting fractions. What do you have to have? Common denominator. Four ninths minus 7/9. The rule of if you have a common denominator, you put that there. And then you just worry about the top. So the equation, the only thing that can make it negative goes on the top. So is the answer going to be positive or negative? Why? But why? The question is, why is it negative? You just gave me the formula for it, but why is it negative? Because the 7 is bigger than the 4, and the 7 is negative, the 4 is positive. Exactly. That's the reason why. What it is, you're right. But it's you want to once you understand the reason why, math is simple. So since 7 is bigger than 4, the answer is negative. 7 minus 4 is 3. Are we done? What do we got to do next? Simplify. 3 goes into 3 once. 3 goes into 9 3 times. So there is your slope. Always simplify your answer as far as the fraction can go. The rule of math is never leave answers in proper fraction. But if your slope was that, would you change that to improper fraction? No, leave it the way it is because the slope means go up 9 over 2. In other words, that does not mean a slope. 9 over 2 means a slope. Okay, so that's a review of what we did last week, which what you guys should be doing over the weekend. So next thing we have the midpoint. What exactly is a midpoint? What exactly is a midpoint? It's in the name. Exactly. The location of the point halfway between two endpoints of a line segment. Let me see. Somebody else is maybe lost. Let me catch them here. So the midpoint is the location of a point halfway between two endpoints of a line segment. That's what mid means. Mid means halfway. So for midpoints, we have to have a beginning and we have to have an end. The point halfway between there is the midpoint. We denote midpoints by a capital M. We denote midpoints with a capital M. So don't be confused. Little m means what? Slope. Capital M means midpoint. So a line is an infinite collection of points that all have the same ratio to each other. And that's what we call the ratio is called the slope, rise over run. So if it goes up to the right, it's increasing. That means all the x's and y's are different. If it's decreasing, x's and y's are different. Vertical means the slope is undefined, which means the zero is on the bottom, which means we have all the x's. Why does the same x's give us zero on the bottom? Very good. What's the formula again? Y2 minus Y1, X2 minus X1. They cancel each other out. If they're the same, they cancel each other out. Very good. If they're horizontal, the slope is zero, which means the zero is on top. And what does that mean? This occurs when we have the same y values. Because the only way a fraction can equal zero is if it's zero on top. What if we get zero over zero? What does that mean about our 2 points? Hmm? No, they can be points. Nope, you can be anywhere. Would you have an idea? We just have not put it to this question. What if we get zero over zero? Well, yeah, the slope would be zero because the slope. That's a good question. The slope wouldn't be zero, and it wouldn't be doesn't exist either. Or there's infinite number of lines. The only way this can be zero is what? if y's are the same, right? Or if x's are the same. So basically, if we had something like it's the same point. If you only have one point, then the slope, you have no slope because you only have a point. So that's it's both of these. Through a point, I can have a vertical line. Through a point, I can have a horizontal line. Through a point, I can have any other line in the world. So that's why it's just a point. It doesn't have a line. You need 2 points to have a line. That was a trick question. But yeah, you were right. Origin, if they're both the same value, 0, 0, 0, 0. Didn't I show you last week on the picture of how to remember these? Did you all use that a second ago? What was the picture I told you about? Slope face, the guy. The guy. Let's give him a name. Slope face. Because we have 4 slopes. If it's going up, it's positive. If it's going down, it's negative. If it's going down, his nose, give him a nose. It's undefined. That's what that U is under there. And his cheeks are at the end of his mouth are the slope of 0. That tells you the slope of 0. Once you understand how to read this graph, it makes a lot more sense. That way, you don't have to memorize anything. It's just if the vertical. Now, remembering all these, like if you have 2 points and they have the same x values, you can go ahead and plug them into the equation and work it out. Or you can say, hey, if the x values are the same, that means the bottom is 0. That means if the bottom is 0, it's undefined, which means it's a vertical line. You don't have to memorize this stuff, but it'll save you the time for having to work it out and figure it out. So if you see a question that has the same x values, you know exactly what the answer is for the slope and the graph and all that sort of stuff. Okay, let's get back to the midpoint. Those of you who came in fashionably late, there are 2 sheets right there that we ought to get. One of them is the library of functions, the graphs we'll be filling out. And then the other one is the schedule of this course, where we're supposed to be. And don't worry about it. I like to start off the semester really slow to make sure everybody understands what's going on. Because as we learn more, we can pick up the pace later on. So that's why if we're not with where that calendar says we are, don't sweat it. We'll catch up at the end. So midpoint. What letter do we use? Capital M. Very good. Remember, it's a point. What does a point look like? What does a point look like? It has an X and a Y component. That, by definition, is a point. Now, to figure out the formula for this, let's pretend we have a number line. I gave you 2 points, 1 and 11. What number is midpoint between 1 and 11? That's what 5.5 is. Trying to slip me a quick one there. What's that? Why?
Well, my geometry teacher said we don't start from the 1 and 11, we start from the 2 and 10, and then we can't cross it out.
Okay, if that's the case, then 1 and 11,000. What's the midpoint between there? I'll come back tomorrow while you're still counting. No, remember how we found the slope formula, the y2 minus y1? Because the distance between these two is 11 minus 1, which equals 10. There are 10 numbers between 1 and 11. Whereas if you start at 1, you count 10, you get to 11. But that's the distance between them. Let's look at this. Instead of these numbers, what if your grades were 80 and 100? What is your average? Why 90? Because it's between 80 and 90. No, how'd you figure it out? Right. So we have 80 plus 100, which equals 180. The reason we divide by 2, because we have 2 grades. So 90 is the number that's halfway. Half means divide by 2, doesn't it? So to figure out the midpoint, mid means half. Half is divided by 2. So what we do is we add our endpoints and divide by 2. So our formula, we have to divide by 2. We have to do it with the x values, and we have to do it with the y values. Let's use the same picture we used last time. From 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3. So we're at 1, 1, and we're at 5, 4. This is the line segment. Line segments begin and end at a point. Remember, line goes on infinitely, forever and ever and ever, has arrows at both sides. A line segment has ending points. It begins at A, ends at B. That is what is called a line segment. So what we have to do to find the midpoint of this graph, we have to find the average of our beginning, or of these 2 points, of these 2 x values. What's the average of those 2 x values? 3. Yeah, because our x1 is 1, our x2 is 5, y1 is 1, y2 is 4. So the midpoint between these two is we add those 2 together and divide by 2. So we know the midpoint's going to be here somewhere. How about the y values? What's the midpoint of the y values? 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. So it's between 2 and 3. There is your midpoint. So all the midpoint is the average of your x values and the average of your y values. That's all it is. So what's the formula do I put down? What formula do I put down in this equation here? Very good. Excellent. X1 plus X2. And then the Y values, same thing. Very good. So that's the formula for midpoint. Take the average of your X's, the average of your Y's, and there's your point. Now, don't get this formula confused with the slope formula. What's the formula for the slope?
Y2 minus Y1 over.
Yes. Little m, y2 minus y1, x2 minus x1. That's your slope. So again, mid means halfway, which means the average. So in our title, we have midpoint, which is the halfway point, which is the average of our 2 points, the X's and the Y's. So far, so good. The next thing we have to look at when it comes to lines, what we call intercepts. What is an intercept? And that's a trick question because there are 2 of them that we're looking for. That is true. I didn't think about that. Yes. That when 2 lines intersect, cross each other, that is an intersect. In this case, yeah, it's where the graph crosses the X and the Y axis. And those are, yes, they are lines. Very good. The X, we have 2 types. We have the X intercept, where the graph crosses the X axis. So that's the X axis. And the Y intercept is where the graph crosses the Y axis. Come. You see, it crosses the X here and it crosses the Y there. Here's our line. Now, here's the important thing. This is if I give you a graph and you would find the intercepts for me. What's the location of the X intercept? In this graph, what's the location of the X intercept? Let me help you. It's there. But what is its location? What's that? It's got to be a point. A location is a point. So in order to be a point, it needs an x and y component. So the x-intercept is where? Where? No, it's got to be, what's the y component? Very good. That is the location of an x-intercept. Because if you look at it, if you go up and down, the y value of an x-intercept is 0. So if I said the x-intercept is at x0 or 50, then we know exactly where that line crosses the x-axis at the number 5. How about the y-intercept? What is its location? 0y. Because for the y-intercept, the x value is 0. So if I give you a graph, you just look where it crosses the axis, and that's the x-intercept. So the y value is 0. And whatever that value is the x value. That's if I give you a graph. How would you solve these if I gave you an equation? Intercepts from equations. So how do you think, with what we just talked about, if I gave you this equation, if I gave you that equation, how would you find the x-intercept and the y-intercept? Okay, the first one we're going to look at is x-intercepts. Let's take what we just learned a minute ago and apply it here. We're looking for the x-intercept, right? It's a point that crosses the x-axis. What is that location? When we're finished with it, what is that actual location? What does the x-intercept look like? When we're finished with the x-intercept, what's going to be in the point? What's the other one going to be? There's two things. We have something here and something here. Look at the page we just did on our graphs. Turn your notes, look at your notes. We just talked about them. What's the location of the x-intercept? That's the location of the x-intercept. The x-intercept is some value x 0. So the only thing we know for sure is what is y equal? 0. So the first thing we do is set y equals 0. Get rid of the y value. And then solve for x. So we have 3x plus 2 times 0 equals 6. was all I want, the x-intercept. I just want to have the x value. I get rid of the y value. So 2 times 0 is 0. That disappears. So what do I have to do to solve for x? Divide by 3. Very good. 6 divided by 3 is 2. So my x-intercept is at 2, 0. Your x-intercept always has to have a 0 in the y value. To find the y-intercept, what do you do? Very good. Set x equal to 0 and solve for y. What you want is 0, y. So for the y-intercept, we have 3 times 0 plus 2y equals 6. I set x equal to 0. So that disappears. And divide by 2. And there's the y-intercept. If it works out, that's how you would graph this equation. You just plot both of these, since they're easy numbers, plot them, connect them, and you're done. But will it always work that easy? Nope. Find me the x and y intercepts of this one. So let's look at these two. We have 4x minus 5y equals 10. 4x minus 5y equals 10. For the x-intercept, what do you do first? Set y equals 0. Basically, what that means is get rid of it. So it means 4 times x, 5 times 0 equals 10. So that disappears. So we just have 4x equals 10. Divide both sides by 4. We can simplify here. 2 goes into 4 twice. 2 goes into 10 5 times. So we get 5/2. So my x-intercept is 5/2, 0. So far, so good. For the y-intercept, so we set this one, we set y equal to 0. This one we set x equal to 0. So 4 times 0 minus 5y equals 10. 4 times 0 is 0. That disappears. Where are you next? See if anybody listened to me last week. What do you do next? Since it's a negative in front, we try to get to y. Let's change all the signs first. So we change that to positive, change that to negative. So we have 5y equals negative 10. Now we just divide by 5. Y equals negative 2. Can you graph this equation? Not with accuracy, because that's a fraction. You could with this part. But this other equation up here, could we graph that one? Yeah. The x-intercept was 2. The y-intercept was 3. If you have solid numbers and you could do a intercept graph like this, what's the slope of that equation? Of that graph? What's the slope of that graph? Remember, negatives and signs and numbers separately. Is it positive or negative? Yeah, the slope is negative because it's going down. Now, from the first point to the second point, what do we do? From this point to this point, what do we do first? Remember, do we go up or down? We go down. How many spaces? 3. Because we have to go from here to here. We go down 3 spaces. And then how many over? There you have it. If I give you a graph, all you have to do is find 2 points and then go from one point to the other point. Do you go up or down to that? If you go up, it's positive. If you go down, it's negative. And it's always to the right. Now, this one is a little bit more tricky because it's a fraction. You wouldn't do it. So how would you graph this equation? Do you know the slope? Well, we kind of do. We have 2 points. We can figure out the slope. To graph an equation, you need to have a point and a slope. We have 2 equations. Here's point 1, here's point 2. So let's first find the slope. We have y2 minus y1, x2 minus x1. So this is x1, y1, x2, y2. So what is y2? Negative 2. Minus y1, 0. x2, 0. Minus x1, it's 5/2. So on top, -2 minus 0 is what? -2. 0 minus 5/2 is -5/2. Do we have a fraction over a fraction? Yes, because 2 is -2/1. Why is that important? Because whenever you have a fraction over a fraction, take the top fraction, which is -2/1, and multiply it by the flip of the bottom. So it's -2/5. It was -5/2 here, so it's -2/5. Is it going to be positive or negative? Yeah, because we have two negatives, so the answer is going to be positive. Negatives cancel. Can anything cancel top and bottom? Twos are on the same side. So nothing cancels. If nothing cancels, just multiply. 2 times 2 is 4. 1 times 5 is 5. That's your slope. So your slope is 4/5. Now we can graph this equation. How can we graph it? Remember, in order to graph it, what two things do you need? Point and a slope. Now, you'll see some books will say to graph an equation, you need 2 points. Okay, if you have 2 points, you can find the slope. Or 1 point and the slope. So in this last one, do we have a point and a slope? What point do we have? Which point are we going to use? The easiest one we have is 0, -2. So we have our point at 0, -2, and we have our slope of +4/5. So plot the point, then follow the slope. So to graph an equation, plot the point, and from that point, follow the slope. So our point is 0, -2. What's our slope tell us to do? Go up 4. From this point, go up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and over 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's our graph. So what we're trying to do here is, if our 2 points don't work, then if we could find 1 point, an intercept, then we can move on from there. Here we have 2 more examples. Find the intercepts of A and B. This is an example. You should be done. Have we ever seen equations like these before? Yes and no. Yes, we have seen like this. No, we haven't seen like this yet. So let's look at this. Let's graph the first one. Let's find some points. So give me an x value. Let's say 0. When x is 0, what's y? 3. When x is 2, what's y? What's y? Let's graph these 2 points. When x is 0, when x is 2, so it's a horizontal line. Notice in this equation, does it have an x value? If it doesn't have if there's no x value, that means it cannot go up or down. Because if it was going up or down, eventually it'd cross the x-axis. But since there's no x's, it's a horizontal line. It's a constant function. This is what we call a constant function. It's no matter what you give me for x, the answer is always going to be 3. Likewise in this one. So when x is -4, y is 0. When x is -4, y is 2. X is always going to be -4. So this column's always going to be -4. What do you think the graph looks like? We just did that. Yes. Because it has to cross the x-axis. So at -4, when x is 0, when x is -4, y is 0. When x is 2, y is -4. So this graph is a vertical graph. These are legitimate equations. I put those there for a reason. You can only have an intercept if you have that variable. You can only have an intercept if you have that variable. If there's no x in the equation, then you cannot cross the x-axis. If there's no y, you cannot cross the y-axis. So the only way you cannot cross the x-axis if it's a horizontal line. It's the same slope as the x-axis. And likewise, the vertical equation, same slope as the. What is the slope of this equation? 0. Very good. What's the slope of this one? Easy way to remember it. This is horizontal, so it's 0/1. This, I flipped it. So this one is 1/0. What do you get when you have 0 on the bottom? Undefined. Very good. So that's how we call reciprocals, flips of each other. You just shift them 90 degrees from horizontal to vertical. It's a lot of stuff being thrown at you, but hopefully it all connects somehow. Another way to graph an equation. Okay, well, first off, to graph an equation, we can use the intercept method. What is the intercept method? Find the x-intercept. Find the y-intercept. Plot them and connect the dots. But this only works if what? These give you solid numbers. If they give you fractions, it's not safe. Okay, so let's look at another method. Finding 2 points. Choose an x value plug it into the equation, and find the y value. Or choose a y value plug it into the equation and find the x value. Now, what does this method mean? How would you do that? Here's the example. If I give you the equation 3x plus 2y equals 6, I'll just do an example of the first one. I want to say x equals 2. I pick a value for x. Plug it in the equation. And solve for y. So 3 times 2 is 6. What do I do next? I picked the value for x. I plugged it in there. Now I got to solve for y. So I got to move the x over, subtract 6 from both sides. 6 minus 6 is 0. Divide by 2. So y is equal to 0. So I know at 2, 0, that's 1 point. I can repeat the process. I say x equals 4. I pick any number, positive, negative, 0, doesn't matter what. I plug it in there. I picked the value, x equals 4, plugged it in there. 3 times 4 is 12. Get rid of the plus and minuses first, so I subtract 12. That cancels. Twelve is bigger than 6, and 12 is, so the answer is negative. 12 minus 6 is 6. Divided by 2. So from the first time, I said x is 2, gave me a y equals 0. Then I put 4 in there, and it gave me negative 3. I plot those 2 points. They work because they're solid numbers. If you get fractions, try another point. You don't want to deal with fractions. All you do is plot both of these points on the graph, and there you have it. Or you could find the intercepts if they both work. You can find the x-intercept, the y-intercept, or just find some points. There's a third method. The third method is the one you'll probably be using mostly. Put in slope-intercept form. You've heard this before. What does the slope-intercept form look like? Mathematicians are not imaginative. The reason this is called the slope intercept, because what is M? Slope. What is B? The y-intercept. B is the y-intercept. In general, in other words, if I had an equation like this, whenever you have an equation set equal to y, the constant number is always the y-intercept. Because if x is 0, that disappears. All we have left is y equals -6. So the constant number, when you have y's by itself, the constant is always the y-intercept. If there's no constant, what is it? In other words, if I had this equation, if I had that equation, what's the y-intercept? Is there anything there? Okay, if you had to put a number in there, what number would you put in there so it doesn't show up? 0. So the y-intercept is 0. So if you were to graph these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the first thing you do is plot the y-intercept. And then from there, follow the slope up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and over 1. There's that graph. If I gave you this equation, since there's no number here, the y-intercept is 0. Why is it the origin? Yes, but why is the y-intercept? Why is the intercept here at 0, 0? How do we find the y-intercept? What's the first step? How do you find the y-intercept? X, exactly. To find the y-intercept, so at x equals 0, which is there, y is 0. So it's 0, 0. Very good. And then the slope is up 3 over 5. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's that graph. So in other words, what this method, the slope intercept method, does is no matter what I give you, solve for y. So what's the first thing you got to do with this equation? Well, if basically what we want is we want this equation. When we solve for y, whatever's in front of the x will be our slope. Whatever's by itself will be our y-intercept. So first thing we have to do, since we're solving for y, get rid of the 3x. Subtract 3x from both sides. So we have negative 3x, positive 6. This is y by itself. What do we have to do? To get y by itself, what do we have to do? Divide by, right. We have to get rid of the 2. So we have to divide each term by 2. Remember, what is a term? No, that's a coefficient.
Oh.
A term is or very good. Those two, yes. Anything separated by plus, minus, or equals is a term. So in this equation, we have 1, 2, 3 terms. So we divide each term by 2. The reason we do that is because each part of this equation now has a special meaning. Whatever's in front of the x is my slope. Whatever is by itself is my y-intercept. So my y-intercept is at 3. And my slope says do what? Go down from this point, go down 3, 1, 2, 3, and over 2. And there's my graph. Make sense? Hopefully, it'll build up because we're going to build up from here. I'll always go back and give you some more examples and stuff like that. Other than that, that's it for today.